and welcome to a very special retrospective 20 years after a little-known event that helped shape my career, TWF Beyond the Grave. An event the likes of which had never been done before and hasn't been done since. If you're an obscure wrestling historian, and I mean really obscure, or you want to know a little bit more about where I came from in this business, well, then this show is definitely for you. I'm Josh Shernoff from Says Shernoff on FITE TV, and today I am joined by two people who took that journey with me. First, to my left, a familiar face to those who have attended the StarCast events. He is a photographer and videographer for that convention. You may have seen him on the StarCast social media page performing some after-hours magic for the staff. He is a producer of Says Shernoff. He is also a former wrestler, and 20 years ago was the manager of the TWF Tag Team Champions, the Warlords. The three collectively were known as the IOV, the Innovators of Violence. He was known simply as Heatwave, but today he is known as Calvin Tan. Calvin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And to my right, he is a former TWF World Champion who somehow managed to escape this business. By day, he is a husband and father of two, the regional sales manager for Cooper & King's American Brandy, Louisville, Kentucky's #1 rated distillery experience 4 years running. By night, he is the keyboardist and singer of the reggae band Ja People. They play a mix of Bob Marley, originals, and funk covers. However, in 1999, he was known as Big Papa and was my opponent at the event we're talking about today. Please welcome Noah Sokoloff.
Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned at the start, I'm Josh Shernoff from Says Shernoff on FITE TV. I'm also the official correspondent for StarCast events and can be found hyping the AEW shows for FITE, as well as hosting such shows as FITE in Focus for events like Ring of Honor Best in the World. I was the owner, booker, and of course, if I was the booker, I had to be the champion of the TWF. While my wrestling career eventually led me to OVW in Louisville, Kentucky, where I probably enjoyed the occasional shot of Cooper & King's Brandy, eventually I ended up working behind the scenes and of course now in front of the camera for FITE TV. So, now that you are all caught up on who we are, let's get to why we're here. October 9th, 1999, we held an event at the Fort Washington Expo Center in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. There was a crowd of 300 to 500 people, depending on who you ask, but most importantly, today, on the 20th anniversary of that event, we want to talk about how Beyond the Grave really came to be. TWF, of course, stood for Teenage Wrestling Foundation. It was a promotion meant to be the little league of pro wrestling. We had held our first TWF event, Armageddon, on June 18th of that year. While that was successfully held in a gymnasium, we had bigger dreams for our follow-up show. Noah, I'll start with you. When I came to you in 1999 and said, hey, we had this really great show at the Hilltop Gym, we're going to do our second show, and I think I want to do it at the Fort Washington Expo Center. What did you think?
It certainly was a stretch from doing a high school gymnasium show to doing a show, you know, like we had bigger plans for at the Expo Center. But I was all in. I mean, I was ride or die with you from the first second.
Calvin, I was curious, the same question for you. When I came to you and said, hey, we're going to do the Expo Center, what were you thinking?
I honestly think that it would never happen at the Expo Center because I haven't seen a wrestling show at an Expo Center, mainly in gymnasiums. So
you're saying you had incredible faith in me?
Yes, of course.
To be able to put this on.
So I didn't think you'd be able to get it. I didn't think you would be able to clear it with them, but you did, and it looked great. I remember walking in and looking at the ring in that space, and it looked amazing.
So to paint a picture, I was 15 at the time, and you were 17, because I turned 16 when we did the show, but when I was setting it up, I was still 15. You were 17, you were like 30 or whatever.
18.
So you were 18, and so I call up, and I'm sure I sounded like a kid calling up, and for whatever reason, I guess they were curious of what I was talking about, and they took the meeting with me. I remember going around with the guy, and he was really just like, I think he just thought it was so cool what we were doing, that it was like that no one had ever done anything like this. Backyard wrestling was such a big thing back then. Like the violent backyard wrestling back in '99 had really become a thing. So for us to just be like, that's not what we are. That's not what we're trying to be. We're trying to be, like I'd mentioned before, the little league of the WWF. Which I still to this day stand by that idea. I think conceptually was a good idea. You have, if you look at the NFL, there's all the way down to Pee Wee football. There's kids doing that. Same thing for baseball. Same thing for soccer. Any other sport. If you look at wrestling, you say, well, it's not exactly a sport. You can look at theater programs that start as young as, like 2 years old. So I think my idea kind of made sense.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we went to, up to Hazleton. We trained with them. We took classes. We tried to, take the extra steps to make ourselves bigger and better and more qualified than just a backyard type of production. And that was kind of it from the get-go, that we weren't a backyard organization, although we were huge fans and started out probably in our parents' basements, practicing on, in our backyards. But, we were from the get-go a step above that. We were learning, we were we were honing our craft, and we had bigger, a bigger vision for this right from the start.
Yes.
So that was.
And that's true. And I think you mentioned the training, and we'll get to the day of training a little bit later. But some of the things that I think we did to kind of separate ourselves from backyard wrestling, for starters, was having an actual venue. That definitely helped, even when it was a school gymnasium. But again, the idea of the Expo Center was like, okay, a school gym makes you think kids, and I was just like, I want to be in a building that makes people think, wow, this is professional. This is something big. I wanted to be taken seriously. And, you can see in some of the images that are behind us and the images that are going to, I'm sure, pop up on the screen. I didn't look like an adult by any means. Not everybody in high school had a goatee and, was a giant. But no, so one of the things that we did to separate ourselves was we wanted to have our wrestling gear be wrestling gear. We wanted to have, as much as we possibly could, have it stand out. But I'll remind you, it was 1999, so you couldn't just go online and get and order wrestling gear. Like, I'm sure there was a place somewhere, but we couldn't find it. So I remember when we did the show in June, some of us were, and I'm saying this side of the table, had already invested a little bit in our attire. You had the Big Papa T-shirt, and I had my singlet that I had airbrushed and everything. You were wearing, I believe, a black beater and black jean
shorts.
Jorts.
Yes, before John Cena.
Yeah, so all right, a trendsetter over here. And also, we mentioned the Warlords. So Matt Mangle and Dorian Porter, they had basically beaters and jeans of varying colors. So when it came time for this big show at the Expo Center, we went to the person who was doing the airbrush, which I will say, anyone who's followed me on FITE TV and everything I'm doing now, kind of my gimmick, because everyone has to have a gimmick in this business, is the airbrush ties. I use the same person, her name's Renee, the same person that I've been using for 20 years, who used to do all my wrestling gear and did my gear when I wrestled on the indies. And she still does my ties, and she did a nice Beyond the Grave themed tie right here, which I'm
very nice,
very proud of. So we all got our money together and said, okay, we're gonna go get things airbrushed, because much like wrestling gear back in, I feel like I'm teaching a lesson. Kids, back in 1999, you couldn't just get printed shirts. Nowadays, wrestlers, they can print one shirt if they want it for their gear. They can print 1,000 shirts if they want to sell them, at a gimmick table. We didn't have that, so we had some designs and we got them airbrushed. Do you remember the first thing you got airbrushed?
I don't actually.
You got the IOV T-shirt.
Oh, that's
airbrushed.
right.
I think it's actually the only thing
that's
you got
right.
airbrushed.
Yes, it's the only thing I had.
Yeah, you had a lot to choose from there.
But back then, I think aside from you, a lot of us dressed in your typical indie wrestling gear. Mm-hmm. So there were really no tights involved. It was just, clothing with airbrushing on it.
Except for my brother Fred, Punch Fresh, who tried tights at the June show, and by October realized that maybe that wasn't something people needed to see a second time. So he got the Hardy Boy style pants. So yeah, then he converted to the indie look. You, Noah, had the Big Papa t-shirt from the first one.
That was airbrushed to look like metal.
Yes, it was really with rivets in it.
And then the second was the red and black singlet.
Yes.
That had the BP just airbrushed right on the...
Yeah, and you wore that. It was kind of like, almost like a Kevin Nash style thing. And that was kind of the fun thing too, is, so how tall are you now?
About 6'3".
Okay, but in the TWF, one of the cool things was you were the giant. You were the Kevin Nash or the Big Show, or you were the giant because you had guys like myself at 5'8" when I was on my toes, and it really worked, and it was something that was really cool because we were able to utilize you from the very first show in June against the 3-2-1 Kid. We were able to utilize you as this like attraction. They always talk about Andre the Giant was an attraction. Well, in our tiny little world of the TWF, you were an attraction. At 6'3", 6'4", you were this monstrous person, And
it was amazing to be that.
Yeah.
To be that guy. I mean, to feel larger than life in this small little group and be the big fish in the small pond. I mean, that was a great role to play.
Well, a lot of the fans that we had were people from our high school. I was in 11th grade, you were in 12th grade, you had graduated. We went to Upper Dublin High School. So we have the show at the Expo Center now. When we did the show at the gym in June, at the gymnasium, we had flyers. And that was basically it. We put flyers at the train stations. We put flyers kind of around at local businesses. And they all had the little tear-off thing that could send them to our website, which was like geocities.com / TWF wrestling or whatever.
Before social media, so
Yeah.
before you could promote on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, so there was nothing like that. So this go around, I thought, okay, well, this is the Expo Center. It was really nice that we had 80-something people show up at that first show, and that did feel really good. But I'm like, okay, we know we'll get some friends, we'll get some family, but how can we expand this? So I had another idea. I thought, well, why don't I just call the newspapers? And somehow, I think again, because this was such a unique story, the Ambler Gazette and the Montgomery County Record both did stories on us, and not just stories, they did front page stories on us with pictures, and those are pictures that are on the screen behind us are pictures from those newspapers. So we had the newspapers who never, and I have a bone to pick with you newspaper people, we were referred to as the Teen Wrestling Foundation and the Teenage Wrestling Federation in the same article. And I'll remind you, we were the Teenage Wrestling Foundation. So they didn't get our name right. They had two different versions of what TWF stood for. Didn't get it right. I haven't carried that with me for a while. No grudges 20 years later. And one of the other things that we did was you did the school announcements, the morning announcements at our school. They let you go on the loudspeaker. And you started off with, I believe, the ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, the TWF proudly presents Beyond the Grave. You did the whole Road Dogg.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And why don't we find out what you thought about being in the newspaper?
I guess it was cool. I mean, I've had my name in the newspaper before from just being on the wrestling team and they covering the wrestling team and who wins, who loses. And I think one other time I had my picture in the paper, and I don't remember if I was cradling somebody or they were giving me or in a cradle and pinning me.
So you don't remember if you were getting pinned?
Yes, I don't remember if I was getting pinned or pinning somebody, but it was cool to see actually my face in the paper holding the belt, even though I wasn't tag team champion.
Right. So let's talk about that. So that's another thing. We meet at the Expo Center.
That picture.
To that right there.
Yep.
There he is. Calvin Tan. And that's Matt Mangle up there with there's my thumb. There we go. Matt Mangle right there. And of course Noah and myself. You were not the tag team champion. Dorian Porter, who was away at college, we basically were just like, okay, we're going to put the belt on you for that, which begs the question of whether or not the IOV had the Freebird rule. Maybe you were a tag team champion. We met at the Expo Center, and they put us, that picture was taken at the Expo Center in front of, they had just black curtains there, and they posed us, and they're like, everybody needs their belt. And I mean, it was all the way down to, I remember them lowering your glasses. Like, they posed us exactly how we wanted it.
And apparently we thought it was cool to all wear sunglasses
Yeah.
for the picture.
Yeah, this was also, okay, so this was 1999 pro wrestling. You had to wear sunglasses, I think. That's, if you go back, if you look at everybody then, like Edge and Christian were wearing the sunglasses, The Rock, which is of course why I was wearing the sunglasses. Yeah, it was a very cool thing. That and leather.
Frosted tips.
Frosted tips. We both had frosted tips.
I was rocking those pretty good.
Yeah, if you're looking at what we're looking up at, we're looking at the monitor so we can see it, so you're not looking at the back of our heads. But yeah, so the other newspaper picture that you have there was just me and Noah. And so here's kind of a funny thing. That was for the Montgomery County Record. The black and white one there was from the Ambler Gazette. What happened was, if you remember, we met at my house, at my parents' house. And they interviewed us, and we talked all about, whatever. I said, okay, we want to get some pictures. So we got dressed in our wrestling gear, and they're like, okay, where do we want to, shoot the pictures? Like, oh, let's go outside. The lighting will be better. So we literally, with all of the effort and all of the work to not be considered backyard wrestlers, the pictures in the newspaper were taken in my backyard. And while you can't see it with that one because it looks really nice, we have the stucco behind us and it's a nice background, there's another picture in there of you suplexing me.
Oh.
And you can just very clearly see as you're holding me up there in an otherwise really fun picture, it's like right around my waist level, there's the roof of my house. Because it was over the garage. So there's, you can just, the way it was shot. And I remember when that came out, I'm just like, we're backyard wrestlers. Like, oh, you're showing we're backyard wrestlers.
Oh, you have to remember that at that time, backyard wrestling had a bad rep because nobody had rings, so they would use trampolines, and kids were getting hurt on these trampolines.
They were using light bulbs.
Yes.
And it was
putting
brutal.
people through tables and chair shots and getting hurt on trampolines, and trash cans was a big thing.
Do you remember the most utilized, and I think this is for any independent pro wrestler in 1999, the most utilized store to be able to buy stuff that could pass as wrestling gear? I'll give you a hint. You, Matt, and Dorian, your entire gear was from this place.
I would say Hot Topic.
Hot Topic. Everyone, so you didn't have anything from Hot Topic. I didn't have anything from Hot Topic. I had from Pacific Sunwear. I had the shiny silver shirt. You, Matt, Dorian, the Masters of Darkness team, everyone got something, whether it was pleather pants or, in Zach's case, a pleather bodysuit. Those fangs. Everybody had gotten their stuff from Hot Topic. Then there was, of course, Goth, who I think just had this stuff. Anyway.
I think he was just,
Fun fact, quick story about Goth. Great guy, Jake Antar, guy I went to school with. Didn't watch wrestling, had nothing to do with wrestling. But was again, when we talked about you being, the giant for us, he was a relatively bigger guy, probably like 5'10" or something, And I'm like, okay, we gotta have him. And he was into Marilyn Manson, loved all that stuff. So he got all this like gothic stuff, and we called him Goth. But as it like G period O, like as it was, stood for something. It stood for nothing. So at one point in the show, I don't know if you guys remember this, Goth came to the ring. It wasn't his match. His match had, I think, already happened.
Yep.
He came to the ring and just stood in the middle of the ring. And just, when asked afterwards, he's like, oh, I thought they called my name. We're like, but you were done. Like, you did your show, all right? Like, you did your match, yes. So he stood in the middle of the ring. So that was just a fun Goth story.
Was he the one that had a giant dagger that he brought backstage?
That feels right. I think so. Yeah, he would have been the one with the dagger.
Yeah, I think he brought a giant dagger.
How do you all remember
backstage.
all of these little details?
You know
because who brings a dagger backstage?
So while we couldn't find wrestling gear online, my brother was able to find two indie workers. I don't remember. I remember her name was Stacy something, but I don't remember his name. And these two characters showed up to teach us how to wrestle because we thought we want to put on a real show. Like you had mentioned earlier, like we'd been trying to learn. It was really a crash course. We weren't old enough to go to wrestling school, so most of us anyway. And so we had these people show up. Earlier in the day, we met there early. We all got into the ring, and we worked on back bumps. We worked on front bumps. We worked on then we worked on like spots. So it's like, okay, what are you gonna do? What's your move? And it's like, oh, we'll choke slam power bomb. Like, okay, practice. So we would like practice the power bomb, practice the choke slam, which the power bomb and choke slam both went very well during the practice. We'll talk about the match later. But we all did that. You sat that one out, I believe.
Well, I was
because you were
managing, so
yeah.
I didn't have to take a bump.
Yeah. And
was
but
nice.
we were in the ring, which was rented from Off of the Wild Samoan. That ring was, I think it was like a converted boxing ring, so it was solid. It was a really hard ring. But we tried our best to learn these bumps, learn to run the ropes, and learn a handful of moves that we could pull off, so that we could basically trick the audience into thinking
We knew what
we
we
were
were
really
doing.
good. So for you, like from your point of view, what was that like? I remember vividly. I remember them trying to get you to do the front flipping bump.
Yeah, I mean, like coming from like wrestling in high school and like having that type of background, having the acting background, and you kind of combine it both. I mean, it was difficult. I remember it being a lot more painful and a lot harder to do than it looks on TV.
Yeah.
And just like a oh man, we're like, this is happening and we're gonna have to like figure this out like fast.
Yeah, and that's even just learning the bumps and a couple of moves. The idea of being able to put a match together, that just wasn't something we as fans and as kids, like we didn't understand what went into putting a match together. And it was, I mean, for even in all the time I spent in the indies and stuff, it wasn't until I went to OVW and got to learn from people like Al Snow and people like Nick Dinsmore and stuff, that I started going, oh, okay, so that's how you put a match together. That makes a little bit more sense. That's why you do this and not do that. And, we were very big on, we had our moves, and we tried to put it together as best we could. But you mentioned acting, and I think that was really what helped. We both had acting experience. Calvin didn't at the time. He does now, but he didn't at the time. But I think the acting experience is what helped us a lot in being able to go, okay, we know bell to bell, this isn't going to be, a 5-star classic, but personality-wise, we can make this crowd, hate me, fall in love with you, enjoy the ride. I think that was...
Yeah, it was an improv class. It was an improv
really good-
exercise. Yeah. It was something like we had some things planned, but it was definitely a learn by the seat of our pants, and we were just kind of like going by the cuff, and just kind of like, we would do our moves, we would take our time, walk around the ring, stomp around the ring, and like collect ourselves, and then do another move.
I was very big on the low blow as a way to buy time if I needed to. I remember, like, if you would be coming after me and looking scary, and I'm just like, I don't know what we're gonna do. I would just be like, kick him. I'll just do a low blow, and that'll give him, like, he'll have to go down to his knees for a minute, and then I'll be able to think of what we're gonna do next, which is just, I mean, objectively terrible in a wrestling match to do. I do remember one, I remember when it came to our match, I don't recall us really planning it out, and you'd think because of the nature of what this was that we planned move by move by move, which a lot of people do now in the indies. They need to do, and even in the pros, they need to know every spot from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like everything. I think we kind of we knew how we'd start the match, we knew how we'd end it, and we knew what our move set was. And in a way, I think maybe while normally now you would look at wrestlers and stuff and you'd say, don't do it or do it that way. Call it in the ring, as they say. For us, it probably would have been a better idea to have planned every single step of the way. I do remember one time where I went to the second rope and I called for a missile drop kick because I used to do a missile drop kick off the second rope. And you looked me right in the eyes and I said missile drop kick, and I gave you a little shot for you to back up, sell the shot, turn around, hit you with the drop kick. You looked me right in the eyes and just grabbed me right off that rope and power slammed me. And I was like, I remember you grabbed me. I was just like, all right, I guess I'm not doing the missile drop kick tonight. And that was it. But it was fun. I mean, it was fun.
I was like, no.
Yeah,
no,
nope, I'm not going to do that. I mentioned before with our gear. So sitting in front of me now, this is the TWF Championship, which I'll actually move closer so you can see. Well, you can't really tell. The belt's actually not that big, and if I slide it back, you can see it's really not that big. It looks big perspective-wise where it is, but this belt was made by Reggie Parks. This was the guy who made all of the championship belts in the WWF that you loved growing up in the 80s and 90s. This belt was, and still is, my pride and joy. I love this thing. Normally when it's not here in the studio, it's on display in my office because it was a really special time for me, and I look at it and I remember how I got my start. At this point in time, we brought in, that's when we first introduced the replicas. We brought in the WCW TV title, and we got a plate that said Pennsylvania, and we gave that to Punch Fresh. And then we had the tag titles were the WCW tag titles, as you can see in the picture there. The WCW tag titles, and we just kind of covered over the WCW logo on the top. And then in the picture, you can't really see because my head's in the way, but Matt failed to cover. I remember telling him, this is Matt, we still got heat. I remember cover it up because it said World Championship Wrestling on the side, and he didn't. But then there was a belt. So this belt, the reason I talked about how small it was, we were teenagers. But you, as we mentioned earlier, were much larger. So we knew going into it that you were going to become the TWF World Champion by the end of the night, and we wanted you to be able to celebrate with the belt. So, do you remember what belt you got?
Yeah, it was the
You remember
I
something.
remember
Right?
this. I remember I had it for a long time. I don't know where it is now, but it was the replica WCW belt, like the old school,
big gold,
big gold one, the Bill Goldberg belt.
Yep, and it's a Big Papa
It did.
on the nameplate, and that was waiting backstage just in case you would have won. That belt was there, and that was the belt that you ended up showing off with. And then this belt was not seen again until February of 2002. So we had those replica belts. And I remember at the time, when we first got them. I remember being in my basement. It was you and me, and we laid these belts out. And we're just like, oh my God, these are... Because you have to imagine, like, kids from the 80s and 90s, like, we didn't have stuff like that. Our belts, our toy belts were foam. Like,
Yep.
we didn't have...
Mine was made out of paper.
Yeah, people made belts out of paper as well. They would make their own championship belts. So when we saw these were incredible. These were amazing. And it was at that moment when we looked at these giant tag belts that I remember you and I just going, man, it'd be pretty cool to be tag team champions too. And this is the beauty of being the booker, and this is like the worst thing you can do in wrestling. Everyone knows you're the booker. Don't make yourself champion. Just don't. It's not gonna. It's just gonna be terrible. Don't do it.
So good.
So we decided to. Well, at the end of the night, after Noah beats me, I'm then going to get on the microphone and cut some sort of promo about how I could beat anyone. And I'd be all like delirious, whatever. I could beat anyone. And the Warlords would come out, who had successfully defended their tag team titles. They would come out. And this was our post-show, for the fans type thing. And our whole plan was the Warlords will come out, and then I'll say, I could even beat you with Big Papa as my partner. And then we would beat the Warlords and become champions. By the time the show actually happened, we were like, you know what? We'll just beat them real quick, and then we'll drop it right back to them like that night. Like we'll have something like Brody did the quick counters. It was ridiculous. But that was really the excitement of seeing these championship belts. We were just like, okay, we need these for ourselves.
We won all of them.
We won all the belts. We won them. So no, that was a fun story. But the replica belts to us, we didn't. I mean, I'm sure every single independent wrestling promotion in 1999 was using replica belts, and they still are to this day. But we thought we were original. We thought this was like, oh my God, people are gonna think we got these giant belts, and it was. But it was fun. So we arrive at Beyond the Grave after we get our training from the Indies finest. Everybody on the show was all sitting around, and they then proceeded to like teach us the knowledge of the business that we needed to be able to do this. And I remember the woman of the two. There was a man and a woman. I remember her saying, "Do you know what a mark is?" And the one guy was like, or someone said something like, "Oh, it's a person who believes it." And she's like, "No, it's a wrestler who still is a fan." And we're like, "All right, whatever." And at that point, we're like, "This is really a waste of our time." But they proceeded to go on and on and on. Then we took a bunch of photographs, and for our website. So let's talk for a minute about the website. Calvin Tan here was the webmaster, I believe, and also did all of our graphics. One graphic that we're going to bring up on the screen now is the Beyond the Grave graphic.
Yes.
Calvin kind of taught himself how to do Photoshop and created this thing.
Yeah, I used to mess around with Photoshop through high school, and so I thought, Beyond the Grave, let's get a couple pictures of graveyard and overlay the logo on there, and then add some effects to it. So.
And it was incredible. The one thing I remember when I looked at it were the bubbles.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about your artistic thoughts behind putting bubbles in this graveyard.
I really wanted it to rain or have water droplets on it, but all I had were bubbles in Photoshop at the time. So that's where the bubbles came from.
And but here's the thing, but then you handed it, like, or you showed it to me and Fred, and we're just like, this is the most amazing thing we've ever seen. Look how professional. Look at the, bubbles like that you'd normally have in a graveyard. Like it was, we were so excited over this.
Yeah, I was limited to the special effects that I had. So it was either fire, which I used on the logo.
Yeah, on the TWF logo, you put the flames on there.
Fire or bubbles or
electricity, which I've already used for your.
No, but you used it in this logo as well. It was red.
Oh yes, it was red this time.
Lightning.
Yes, it was like heat lightning. Hence the bubbles for the raindrops. Bubbles.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it was just boiling rain. That was bubbling.
Yeah, and I don't know where I found the pictures of the gravestones online somewhere. So that was before Google Images. So I must have, I don't know what I typed
AOL
in.
keyword graveyard or
Yeah, but I found it online somewhere, and I saved it and probably used it illegally. So
I'm pretty sure you were using Photoshop illegally.
I was using that too.
Yeah,
That's
you
how I
had
learned.
to. There's no.
That was back in the day when AOL had very little security. So we used to go into the chat rooms where you could download any program that you wanted.
Yeah, it was.
So Photoshop was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of the logos we talked about the airbrushing and how I had the HCC logo, was my group, and the IOV logo. Those you made them.
Yeah,
you made those on Photoshop, and then we took them to the airbrush artist.
Yeah, like growing up, I grew up watching wrestling in the 80s, early 90s, and what stood out to me about wrestling at the time were the characters, right? These different characters. So when doing these logos, I looked at the character and I wanted to do something different for each character. So for the HCC Hardcore Clan, and especially your character, I gave you guys the lightning, the blue lightning. For us, the IOV, the Innovators of Violence, that was obviously, that name was inspired by, I was a big ECW fan, so Tommy Dreamer. And then obviously my wrestling character named Heatwave came from the pay-per-view Heatwave. I think 99 or something.
I never put two and two together on that.
So
that's where I never put that together. Wow.
Yeah. So I think for our logo, the IOV logo, it looked like it was like chrome.
And that's the other thing you have to think. Like, we're talking about this, and for those of you, Mom, who managed to stay the whole time to watch this entire panel here, we thought this was the biggest thing going in wrestling right now. Like, we were setting the world on fire with the TWF. And I still stand by the fact that it stands the test of time in uniqueness because other people just didn't do it. But, I mean, we were an independent wrestling company that ran two shows. Like, that's really all it was, with a bunch of untrained kids hoping not to kill each other. And, but going back to what you're talking about, so I found that when you would do things like this, the Photoshop and stuff like that, I found that amazing. I found that to be so much bigger than what I knew deep down inside we really were. You know, I found that to be, I guess we all wanted to believe we were this big thing. And in our own little circles, it felt really big. And we were in the newspaper. And in our town, it was a big thing. But it was important to us to have things like the championship belt and to have things like the photoshopped files and the airbrushed gear and stuff like that, because I think that really allowed us to kind of puff ourselves up and be like, you know what, like it's not just in our minds. It's not, you know, an e-wrestling federation, like, you know, we used to go on and it was all text saying who ran to the ring and, you know, I think that for us, that was really, those were all really important. And, so thank you 20 years later for your contribution.
Yeah, I mean, that time it gave me the ability to cut people out and put a background on them and layer things. And when we started doing that, it looked like just like anything else out there at the time. So it was really cool for us to have, you know, promo shots that looked legit at the time. And you mentioned, you know, it was like everything else that was out there at the time. And by that, you mean WCW and WWF, because there wasn't anything else really out there. Like now, the quality of that, while I love them still, looking back at those pictures, I mean, that's stuff that now you could have like a third grader could make something on their phone in 5 seconds with some app that's like, that would blow it away, because technology is just there now, but it wasn't at that time. And you know, as I talk about all this, and our crew here at Montgomery County Community College that was born within a couple of years after we did this show, they're all looking at this going, Photoshop? What do you mean layers? Of course, that's just an easy thing to do. But it wasn't. It wasn't easy for us. Well, and we've evolved over time too. So, you know, I mean, moving past this, like we eventually created entrance videos.
Yes.
You know, we eventually got a mixer and, you know,
and failed miserably at getting commentary.
But we ran our own sound with the entrance videos. We built a ramp, you know, we had a projector that projected the entrance videos up.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to talk about the set, I mean, I remember building that set with you.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, going to Home Depot and getting the big pieces of plywood and painting them and splatter painting them. And
so as of when my parents sold the house, it was still in the roof of the garage.
Sick.
Up in the ceiling there.
And if you look at, you know, the gravestones here, like that was the first step into having an actual set for a show. So I guess our inspiration was Halloween Havoc at the time.
100% Halloween Havoc.
But it was such an awesome entranceway to have the tombstones there, have the, you know, hay bales and all that.
Hay bales, and we had little, you know, jack-o'-lanterns and the cobwebs and everything. And
in terms of production for a independent, you know, wrestling company, I mean, we were always pretty good with the production.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
how we presented ourselves.
Yeah, I think that was our thing. Like Noah had mentioned earlier, with having acting to fall back on, we talked about how that really helped us because we were so character driven. I think our production, I think being character driven, these were the things that made people in the beginning go, oh, it's some silly teenage wrestling thing, and walk away going, that was a really entertaining show. I really enjoyed that.
Well, you know what? I think that comes just from like us in nature, you know, wanting to exceed what anyone else had ever done and wanting to push it further, and like, you know, seeing what other independent wrestling organizations had going for them, that were, you know, grown, like more professional, you know, these guys were getting paid to do what they're doing, and we're doing it better than them. But, you know, it was just great to just kind of like take it to the next level and make it as professional as we could with the means that we had.
Yep.
Really.
So when it came time to the actual show, as we're beginning to wrap things up here, we'll touch base real briefly on the match you were involved in, which was the tag title match. Now, unfortunately, one of the wrestlers didn't show up, so we threw in there a guy by the name of Mark the Madman Goldberg to team with lukewarm John Brody against the Warlords. The reason I really wanted to touch base on this match isn't for storyline purposes, isn't for anything, but to show you the bullet that we dodged as kids.
Yes.
Because now, as adults, we can look back on this and say, "Oh my God, this was a horrible idea." Like, what were we thinking? And there was one point in the match where, aside from the fact that the Warlords were just stiff as could be.
Yeah. There wasn't much, I would say, training.
No. And I wrestled Mangle up until, I think, 8 years later, and he was still just as stiff, even with all of his training. So
Yeah,
I think that was just it.
And I think the reason why we threw in Mark, the Madman Goldberg, is because he was also a member of the wrestling team. So I think...
Yeah, and he was, well, I remember you had called me at one point, and like, hey, can we find a spot for Mark? And I was like, we kind of got the thing booked or whatever.
So he
and I was
had
like,
absolutely
we'll throw him in
no
this match or
training
whatever. And
at all.
No, he didn't have any training.
Just toss them around a little
Yeah,
bit.
they really did. But the moment of truth that I wanted to talk about was when the African assassin, Dorian Porter, hoisted Mark Goldberg up onto his shoulders.
For a Dominator.
For a, not just any Dominator.
running Dominator.
A running Dominator.
And I don't know where he got this idea for the running Dominator, because I know he was going to do the Dominator, but a running Dominator,
Yeah.
I have no idea where that came from.
It was ill-advised at best, and he dropped Mark directly on his head. Mark folded up. I remember watching it back when we all were together. I remember watching it back, and we put it in slow motion, and you can see there is one point in time where his face is just touching his chest. And if you don't believe me, we will roll that and show you in slow motion. He just folded up like an accordion.
Yes, he did.
And we're joking about it now, but I remember being on the outside of the ring. I was managing Mark and Brody. And I remember honestly thinking to myself at that moment, I'm like, he's crippled or dead. Like, that was really what I thought. And I was very quickly, like, the stuff I'd never considered, like, oh, we might get hurt, instantly dropped on me. And I thought, oh my God, this was a terrible, terrible mistake. But no, it was a scary moment. What did you think? You were outside the ring at the time. What did you think?
I just think I'm thinking, thank God, he's okay, because
What did you think in the first instance?
First instant, I'm like, oh my God, like,
That was awesome.
did he break his neck? Did he break his neck? Because I'm looking, and then you're sitting there looking for signs that he may be okay, and then when you start seeing that, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
he escaped that one, but
And then had the second half of the match to do. And
Yes.
we actually, I should mention, so Brody, not only did the partner not show up, because in a perfect world, Brody would have sat out because I think it was like 5 days earlier, he had surgery on his hip. He had broken his hip playing soccer. So Brody didn't wrestle the entire match. So Mark had to wrestle this entire match against guys that I, as the owner of this, would not have.
and it
booked
wasn't
myself to
really
wrestle.
a wrestling match. It was
A beating.
It was a beatdown.
yeah, it was.
He hit a move, I think, at one point. A DDT on Porter, and Porter's hair kind of took the brunt of
he
it.
might
Yeah,
have.
so-
But I remember it just being a squash match,
it really
pretty
was.
much. So he had to just take everything,
Yeah.
including that running Dominator. And I remember seeing him afterwards, and he was hurt. But, I mean, thank God that he at least had some kind of wrestling experience, so he was used to getting, bruised up a little bit, and
He also had
hopefully that helped.
He also had experience in the locker room with Andrew Sagan, Vortex, who was working as an aide to the cameraman that night, not even working. But I got word after the show, someone's like, "Oh, did you hear that Mark and Andrew got in a fight?" And I was like, "No, I didn't know." And whatever, I don't want to say what the rumor was of what Mark had said or done or whatever it was. But apparently they had a little scuffle, which to me is just so difficult to visualize that I wish I would have seen it. But yeah, so he did not have a really good night that night. Yeah, the last thing I want to ask you about that was when that music hit and you walked through the curtain, it was you, and I remember it like it was yesterday, it was you, and then Matt and Dorian behind you, and then because you were kind of like, not so much their managers, you were kind of like their cult leader. What did you feel when you walked through that curtain? What was that like for you?
You get that surge of like adrenaline, right? That like I don't think I've ever felt before, because doing amateur wrestling, going out there, you're not getting that kind of pop, when you come out.
You're not getting your own entrance music,
and you don't get your own entrance music either. But all the lights are on you. The set looks great. I'm walking out. I remember because I walk out and then I looked to the sides, and I had Matt and Doran right behind me, and then we go to the ring, and I just remember hearing the crowd, and it was like it was just a rush, and especially because everyone was cheering because they knew us, they were our friends and family and stuff like that. So it was cool to go out there and be on that side of it, instead of being on the other side watching from a seat.
So I'll start by saying, do you remember what your entrance was originally supposed to be?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah?
Yeah, that where I was going to drive the car.
Yes, you were going to drive, which I didn't remember until Fred actually
It said Big
told
Papa
me a
on
couple
my
days
vanity
ago.
plate.
It said Big Papa?
Yeah, on the vanity plate.
So Big Papa was kind of like a nickname that you had off of like Biggie Smalls, that like people call you Biggie, so you came
It
up
was
with
like
that.
my AOL screen name,
Yeah.
and then like it turned into the character, and then I just kind of was like, I guess
Big Papa.
Yeah.
But so you were supposed to do that, and then that was quickly squashed when they're like, "Oh, we don't know that we want him to drive his truck onto the carpet in the room here." So originally, when we had talked about doing the show in the larger room, that was a concrete floor, and that was something that they were used to bringing in big, trucks and everything like that. So so we switched that. So your music hits, which was Big Papa by Biggie Smalls. That crowd went insane. I have been very lucky to have a decent career in the indies, and the time I spent in OVW, I have been able to be around when a lot of big name people for whatever territory it had been in these smaller venues. You can't compare it to an 11,000 seat arena, but I'd been in these things where there were 300 people, something like that. I still, to this day, I'd never heard anything that loud. And there's so many reasons, and you can say like, oh, well, okay, but these were friends and family, and sure, whatever. But for us, what, and we'll play at this point, I think we'll just put that video clip in here so that people can hear the sound of that, because you can't hear the ring announcer really because it's so loud. What was that like for you to walk through that curtain?
Well, like when it's all happening and we've talked about all these plans and it's all culminating to this one point where the music hits, and like that's the drama, right? Like that was the peak. Like you walk out there and you're on top of the world. You're feeling great. The energy was so good. And yeah, just to have like the focus on you and have all your people there and everyone kind of like just, it really felt like we were like justified, like we succeeded. We got all these people here to watch us, and they're like loving it, and it was a great feeling. I mean, like Calvin said, just like a huge rush to just have that, just to have our friends, our family, people embrace this project that like we really put everything into, and that's like where all the emotion kind of like peaked right at that.
Yeah, it was a really cool moment, and a lot of people who are watching this might look at that and go, you guys are a bunch of kids, like this doesn't, like this in the history of pro wrestling, this is one of the most meaningless moments in wrestling's history. And we're not arguing that as objectively looking at the entire industry. But on that night in our lives for us, I will say that moment of you coming through the curtain was everything that you were feeling. I got like goosebumps from it being in the ring for that. For me, and part of it was I was a heel. I was coming out there, people were booing, and I was loving the reaction I was getting. But that music hitting, that everything was just, I was like, oh my God, like and then I remember in it, like I just shirt off, belt off, and I was like, I'm ready to go. And I felt like so pumped up from that. We get into the ring. I'm not going to take everybody through a play-by-play. There's another video of us watching that masterpiece back. But there were a couple of spots in the ring there. I had mentioned earlier that we did the choke slam and the power bomb flawlessly when we were rehearsing earlier in the day. That was not the case when we did the actual thing. You picked me up. I went to kick my leg. My leg was caught between your legs, so I ended up landing on my feet. It was awful. Then there was the power bomb. I think the adrenaline maybe got into you, and you dropped to your knees on the power bomb instead of what normally was placing me down. And I just my head just whipped back, and that happened. And I then remember Brody picking me back up outside the ring and walking me to the back. I'll remind you, we mentioned this earlier, you powerbombed me, you pinned me, and then I cut my whole promo. After you celebrated and left, I then cut my whole promo. The IOV came out. We wrestled them. We won the titles. The referee then reversed the decision. And then I got hit with the finisher from the IOV, rolled out of the ring, and that is when Brody actually helped me up. So I'm laughing about it now. It was in '99. A lot of people know now. They look at concussions, everything we know about it through pro wrestling, through the NFL, everything. We know so much more about it. Back then, it was a badge of honor, and yeah, it's something I can laugh about because I was very lucky to escape it with just a minor concussion, or as we used to call it, getting my bell rung. It was just like, oh, you're fine. But I remember going back in the locker room, and we had a doctor on premises, and I remember Zach telling me Fangs telling me to lay down, put my feet up, and the doctor is like, he's like checking me out. He's like, if you think you might have a concussion, you should go to the hospital. And I'm like, what did we pay you for to be here? But everything was okay because we went back to my house that night, and all of us just stayed up watching the show. So we stayed up till I felt good, and then I went to sleep, and I'm still here. So it worked out well. But
that's good.
What do you remember from the match itself?
So all I remember, the match it's kind of a blur. I don't remember so many pieces of it. I just remember this one piece. I think Brody had a crutch, right?
Yes. Oh my
and
God.
All I remember is
that.
We had this piece at the end of the match or something planned where he was gonna break the crutch over me, and I was just so nervous. I remember being so nervous about oh man, how is this gonna hurt? and taking a chair shot. You think that when you're watching it in the WWF that they're using a fake chair or it's made out of some type of mushy material, and I'm how do you take a chair shot? And make it look real. Well, you take the chair shot. You actually have to get hit.
That was the 1999 mentality. It was you put your head out. And that's
yeah,
how you take a chair
the shot.
Yeah.
So I would just remember thinking the whole entire thing all right, I just can't wait to get hit with this thing, and hopefully it doesn't hurt. But
did it hurt you? Did the screw?
Yeah, the screw I think poked a hole
right?
in me.
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah, I had that for a while. Yeah.
That was bad.
Hindsight.
Do you remember where the chairs came from?
I don't.
So I remember when we were all in the ring, you got there a little bit later than I was the first one there anyway because I was running this stuff. But you got there a little bit later because I'm fairly certain you had something like a men's choir practice or performance or something like that. So you come in with the chair that you took from the chorus hallway at the high school.
Oh,
so that is the chair from.
That
so
we
thank
used.
You, Upper Dublin High School, for lending us that chair for Beyond the Grave. It was a really special night in 20 plus years of being involved in this business, and like I mentioned earlier, you somehow managed to escape it. I thought I did, but now I'm back and couldn't be happier. Calvin and I have had an opportunity to have some really incredible opportunities, to use that word twice in a sentence, to work for FITE TV, to work for StarCast, to be backstage at AEW shows and on the arena floor shooting stuff for FITE TV and doing things like that. We've had these incredible been able to be there and witness incredible moments in wrestling history within this last year. To me, I'll just speak for myself here, with everything I did, this for me, and I don't expect it to ever be this for any fans, but for me, this was one of and will always be the top of the list of a highlight of my entire career in professional wrestling. What about for you? Where does this stand for you in your life?
Well, it's got to be up there because we created this from nothing. You know, we were all just big fans of wrestling, and we decided we wanted to do this, and it wasn't just one person. Everybody came together to help out and build what it is, you know, what it was. I mean, thank God nobody got seriously hurt.
Seriously, and we you know, like I said before, we joked about with Mark, and we joked about the concussion and getting the stuff, you know, getting hit with the chairs and stuff, but we were very lucky. I absolutely recommend against any kids who are watching this, any teenagers going, I think it's high time we bring the TWF back. Like, no, just really don't. But
But
yeah,
it was but the journey to it, you know, it was such a fun time going up and training, you know, at the Wild Samoan, you know, creating the set, creating the graphics for it, you know, you got the belt made and looking at it, you know, seeing the entranceway the day of the show, being backstage, and just listening to the people fill in, you know, and sit down, and just knowing that they're out there and they're waiting for you to go through that curtain, you know. It's such a great experience, and you know, I wouldn't change any of it. You know, maybe I would if somebody got seriously hurt.
Goldberg might.
But yes, but it was such a fun time in our lives, you know, to be able to creatively use our talents, you know, towards something that we all love, and actually put it on, and you know, put it out there, you know, and have people enjoy it.
Same for you. Where does this rank for you as far as memories and experiences?
Oh man, well, like certainly for high school, I mean, it was a great time, just like all of the whole group of guys there. I mean, it was groups of kids from different parts of all of our lives, right? Like you had some of your friends from your former school.
Yeah.
I had some of my friends from, you know, youth group.
Yeah.
We had some kids from the wrestling team. We had some kids from the theater club,
Theater,
and drama. And it was such a cool melting pot of kids. And we really were ahead of our times with this. I mean, you know, a lot of kids were playing video games, or, you know,
Which we still were.
Yeah, we were doing that too. You know, travel baseball, travel soccer, playing sports. We were creating something from scratch, and, you know, living a dream out, like living our dream out, and like doing it and making it. And it was a great time just to be involved with it. And I talked about it for, you know, you talk about it for forever. There's always stories. Yeah, for 20 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years.
That's painful, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just like checking out my hairline in that picture. It was a great year for my hairline, and yeah, it was a really fun time, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah. And I just, as we wrap things up here, want to take the opportunity with this platform that I'm lucky enough to have through FITE TV, and of course this is airing on our YouTube channel. I want to thank you guys, and really anybody who's watching this who was involved in Beyond the Grave. I truly believe that had we not done this show, I don't believe that I would be able to be experiencing the things in the wrestling business that I am today. And some people might think that's kind of silly, but the energy and excitement and the success of the show, it almost was as though I was chasing that again for decades. Every time I would wrestle an independent show or run my own shows, or when I was in OVW or any of that stuff I did, there was a part of me that was always saying, I want another moment, like Beyond the Grave, what that felt like. And now at this stage in my career and doing what I'm doing in wrestling now, I'm able to look at it and realize that that lasting effect that Beyond the Grave had on me, that is really what is responsible for continuing that drive. That experience And I've been lucky enough now to be able to experience just some amazing things in this business that I love. I've been a fan of my entire life. So again, thank you guys for being here today. Thank you for 20 years ago being there that day. And thank all of you for joining us and our trip down memory lane. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was fun. Hope you learned a little something. For Calvin Tan and Noah Sokoloff, I'm Josh Shernoff. Good night, everybody.